Somewhere today, someone is doing a task so small they can barely stand it, answering the phone, sweeping a floor, filling out a form nobody will ever read twice. And somewhere else, someone else would give almost anything to be allowed to do that exact same thing. The same broom, the same room, the same ordinary Tuesday. This is the true story of a boy who was handed a broom as his entrance exam into the only future he had. And why the smallest task you're given today might be somebody else's entire dream. Stay with me until the end. His name was Booker. He was born enslaved in 1856 on a small farm in Virginia. In a cabin with a dirt floor and cracks in the walls wide enough to let in the winter wind. He did not know his exact birthday. Enslaved children rarely did. When he was about 9 years old, freedom came. The Civil War ended, and for the first time in his life, Booker belonged to no one but himself. His family moved to Malden, West Virginia, where his stepfather found him work packing salt and later work in the darkness of a coal mine. But there was one thing young Booker wanted more than rest, more than food, more than anything else in the world: to go to school. He would watch other children who had always been free, walk past him with books under their arms, complaining about homework, about having to wake up early, about how boring their lessons were. To them, school was an obligation. To Booker, it was a locked door he pressed his face against every single day. He taught himself the alphabet from an old spelling book. He talked his mother into getting him a copy of Webster's Blueback Speller. And when a school for black children finally opened in Malden, he begged to attend. But his stepfather needed the money from the mines more than he needed his son's education. So Booker worked from before sunrise, and only after came the letters, one at a time, taught to himself in the dark. There was a woman in that town, Viola Ruffner, the wife of the mine owner who hired him as a houseboy. She was famously exacting, some said impossible to please. She wanted every corner swept, every surface without a speck of dust, every task finished completely or not started at all. Most boys who worked for her did not last a month. Booker stayed for nearly 2 years, and, without knowing it, he was being trained for the single most important morning of his life. When Booker was about 16, he heard about a school 3 states away, built specifically to educate formerly enslaved people, the Hampton Normal and Agricultural Institute in Virginia. He decided, with almost no money and no clear plan, that he was going to get there. He sold what little he owned. He worked odd jobs along the way. He walked. He rode in wagons when a stranger would let him. He slept outdoors more nights than he could count. The journey was nearly 500 miles, and by the time he arrived in Hampton, he had almost nothing left. A few coins, a single change of clothes, and a body worn thin from weeks on the road. He walked into the admissions office looking, by his own account, like the poorest, most ragged student anyone there had ever seen. The head teacher, a woman named Mary Mackey, looked at him with open doubt. Other students, better dressed and better rested, had been welcomed without a second glance. Booker was told to wait. For a long, humiliating stretch of time, it seemed as though he had crossed 500 miles only to be turned away at the door. Finally, Miss Mackey decided to test him. Not with a written exam, not with a question about history or arithmetic. She pointed him toward an empty recitation room and told him to sweep it. To anyone else in that building, sweeping a room was a chore. A 5-minute task. Something you did without thinking, the same way you'd wipe your feet before coming inside. But Booker understood something the other students never had to learn. This broom was not a broom. It was the only door left standing between him and the rest of his life. So he swept that floor 3 times. Then he took a broom and dusted every bench, every table, every windowsill and closet 4 separate times, until there was not one particle of dust left anywhere in the room. When he was finished, Miss Mackey walked in and ran her own handkerchief across the tables, the benches, the corners of the windowsills, searching for even a trace of dust. She found none. She looked at the ragged, exhausted boy standing in front of her and told him, quietly, that he would do. He was in. Years later, writing about that morning, Washington said it plainly. He had passed several examinations since then, but that sweeping a room was the best examination he ever passed in his life. At Hampton, Booker came under the influence of the school's founder, General Samuel Armstrong, a man who believed something most people in 1872 found strange: that there was no shame in work done with your hands, and that dignity was not something you were born with. It was something you built, one honest task at a time. Booker paid his tuition the same way he'd earned his admission, as the school's janitor, sweeping the very halls that had almost turned him away. Booker graduated from Hampton in 1875. He taught for a few years. Then, in 1879, General Armstrong invited him back to Hampton as a teacher, and 2 years after that, recommended him for an opportunity that would define the rest of his life, leading a brand new school for black students in Tuskegee, Alabama. When Booker arrived in 1881, there was no school. There was a small, worn-out shanty with a leaking roof, borrowed alongside a run-down black Methodist church. The roof leaked so badly that on rainy days, one of his own students would hold an umbrella over his head while he taught, just so the lesson could continue. There was no money for real buildings. So Booker did what Miss Mackey's test had already taught him. He did not wait for the version of the dream that looked impressive. He began exactly where he was, with exactly what he had. He and his students literally built the school themselves, making bricks with their own hands, laying foundations, constructing classroom buildings brick by brick, plank by plank, term after term. It was not fast, it was not glamorous. Some terms the school nearly ran out of money entirely, and Booker had to travel and speak and ask for donations, one uncertain conversation at a time. There were setbacks, funding that fell through, buildings that took years longer than planned, doubts from people who thought a black-led school in Alabama could never survive. But brick by brick, term by term, the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute grew. What began as one leaking shanty and one borrowed church became, within about 2 decades, a campus of dozens of buildings, hundreds of students, and a faculty educating a new generation the same way Booker himself had been taught, through the dignity of ordinary, unglamorous work done completely. By the time Booker T. Washington died in 1915, the school that started with a borrowed shanty and a broom had become one of the most respected institutions of its kind in the country. He had gone from a boy who wasn't allowed to want an education to a man who built one for himself and for thousands of others. My friend, here is the truth Booker's story leaves behind. Somewhere in your life right now, there is a task that feels beneath you. A small assignment, a boring shift, an ordinary room somebody asked you to clean up, literally or otherwise. It is easy to treat that task like an interruption to your real life. But you rarely know, in the moment, which broom is just a broom, and which one is the door to everything you've been hoping for. So here is what to do with that. First, stop waiting for the version of your dream that looks impressive before you start giving your full effort. Second, do the small thing in front of you as completely as you possibly can. Not for anyone watching, but because you don't know yet what it's actually a test for. And third, remember that what feels routine to you might be the exact thing someone else is quietly praying for the chance to do. Treat it that way. Somebody, somewhere, would trade almost anything for the ordinary opportunity sitting in your hands today. Sweep the room like it matters. It might be the only exam that counts. If Booker's story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And remember, sweep the room like it matters.